Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the Uncapped podcast, brought to you by Roasthouse Pub, one of Frederick's finest craft beer and culinary destinations, where great people come to drink amazing beer. Visit them to track their taps and menu at roasthousepub.com or download the digital pour app to track what's on tap. This week, we have Lion Distilling Company, and all the way from St. Michael's, Maryland, Ben Lyon was nice enough to come visit us.
Here we are.
The co-founder and master distiller.
Yep.
So, first, you have quite a history of doing cool stuff, don't you? If I remember correctly.
That's a really kind way to open up. Yes.
But you've done you've done a lot of different things before
right.
you became a distillery founder and.
That's very true, and it's funny what parts of my, I don't know, I guess, professional history people want to latch onto. But what I always like to open with and sort of start with is kind of unique in the distilling world, in that before all of this, I actually worked for a distillery.
Which is rare. Which
is totally rare. I was a home brewer in college. I've always been obviously a very enthusiastic drinker, which is certainly helpful, in this line of work. But right after college, I had some time to kill before I was starting my quote unquote real job, and so I went and worked for Cisco Brewers and 888 Distilling out on Nantucket. The intention was to get some hands-on experience in the craft beer world, because they were one of the first and sort of premier kind of New England breweries at the time. And got out there and realized, whoa, they have this whole distilling thing going on, and they're making what is now regarded as one of the absolute best single malts in the world, a rum, which of course now for me is key, a gin, vodka, and a couple other things. So it was a really interesting experience, and that I wasn't expecting to do that, and it sort of led to this whole thing. And because I sort of realized, hey, I'm never going to have a better job than this. Sure enough, I never did. So here's Lion Distilling Company. That's
but what were some of the things you've done? You were in radio a little bit,
yep,
right?
I had a radio show in college. I was for a very brief time in New York. I was a political talk show producer. I've been a political consultant. Spent a few years on Wall Street, and have also been a lobbyist as well.
Where are you originally from?
Hanover, New Hampshire.
Okay.
So New England. Yeah, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Was born in D.C. though, so my roots aren't all that far, I guess.
So are you one of those Patriots fans, or are you, or do you just not even care about sports ball?
Yeah, I mean sports ball. I love it. No, growing up there. Jay Fiedler went to Dartmouth, and one of my buddies' dads was, the quarterback coach at Dartmouth. So we were all like, when he got drafted by the Patriots, we were like, yeah, Jay Fiedler, this is awesome. And so I guess that kind of led to a little bit of, fanaticism for a minute. But the truth of the matter is, I don't really care about sports ball that much.
I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I'm kind of I don't have a choice but to be a sports fan.
You gotta.
And I'm also tired because
the Stillers.
They were. That
Penguins.
game didn't end till like midnight, I think, almost.
Right, exactly.
I hate 8:30 games.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But
so
I'm not a hardcore NFL fan or anything like that. So.
And I believe there's something with boating.
Yeah. So my real heart and soul and passion is in cycling, skiing, and sailing. And so pretty much almost every weekend, and a lot of basically every Wednesday night. Between April and November, I'm sailing, so it's nice. And so where the distillery is very convenient, because
it works out
St.
well.
Michael's, Maryland is like the lovely little drinking town with a sailing problem. We're right there on the Chesapeake Bay, so it's if you like sailing, it's sort of an amazing place to be.
I love sailing. In fact, we did an episode from a boat.
No kidding.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
From a schooner.
Yeah.
And when we're done, you may want to ask Graham about our experience of doing that, because
I have no comment on that.
I was going to say,
Graham
obviously,
may not have had as much fun as I had.
Is Graham prone to seasickness?
I don't know if he's prone, but he's definitely had it.
All right. A little Dramamine, a couple swigs of rum, and you're good to go. Yeah.
So what kind of cycling do you do?
I was actually, growing up, I was a really serious mountain bike racer. Actually got to the point where I was racing at the semi-pro level. And and then obviously, at one point I ended up wrecking my knee, and so sort of quit racing. But on the Eastern Shore, it's pretty flat and not a lot of trails. So I do a lot of road biking now, and that's been kind of the evolution of the thing. But
I biked a lot more before I wrecked my knee, and then didn't bike. And gained a ton of weight because I kept eating like I was biking.
Right, exactly.
So I used to bike at least 100 miles a week, and. What kind of bike do you ride?
I actually have 6 different bikes. So I've got a custom Tsunami aluminum road bike. I've got 2 mountain bikes. Another custom bike I built up for I did the Gap Trail from Pittsburgh to DC a couple years ago with one of my buddies.
Yeah,
so.
I plan on someday I'll do that. Just have my wife drive me up there, drop me off in Pittsburgh, and ride down.
It is a great trip.
The group of friends I ride with regularly. Also have the same sort of drinking affinity. They did a good portion of it a few years ago and planned it out where there would be stops for drinking along the way.
Little periodic safety meetings,
Yeah, and I also have. Well, it's my my fat bike. I have a holder on the fork that's perfectly sized for a growler. So
excellent.
We can bring alcohol and.
It's perfect. And it's flat, because it's all former rail bed for most of the way, and then you get to the canal.
I think, no more than a 1% grade.
Exactly. Constant the whole way, so you can you fly. That's cool. It's really cool.
So how long were you working at the other distillery till you decided I need to do this for my own? Or were some of those other jobs in between
It was almost a year.
Okay.
Almost a year.
So you went straight from there to opening Lion?
No. So that was right out of college. Then I went and had a real job as a political consultant, and then did all the stuff.
Made the money to be able to.
In theory, yeah, and did all the things that sort of made me realize, wow, the real, regular, normal working world is not all that much fun. And what I always tell everybody is I was never very good at having a boss anyway. So I think
cubicles.
I think a lot of us,
reports all suck.
Right, TPS reports. Milton Wadhams and everybody. I think what a lot of us, brewers, winemakers, distillers, and creative people and people who like, making stuff, getting hands-on, all sort of share is that, authority and rules and, people telling you what to do, or it just runs counter to your very
there's always some moron telling you what to do.
Oh my God, right? It's so. But then I think the double-edged sword there is when you do go out on your own and you do start your own business and you start making stuff and selling it, and
you're that jerk now to someone.
Well, and you have to be the jerk to yourself because then in a way you're almost more kind of stuck on the grind. You know what I mean? Because once you start, you can stop, but but it's almost more, because it's more compelling. You're almost more driven in a way that that I didn't think you ever would have expected. I certainly didn't, which I guess is the wonderful thing about it, right? And it's the whole entrepreneurship and creative drive and all that stuff. But
now, when did Lion Distilling open? You've been open for quite some time now, haven't you?
December 7th, 2013.
Okay.
So we're 3 days away from our 4-year anniversary.
So you definitely are... at this point, like the old men on the block,
which is so weird to me.
Yeah. So how did you open so much sooner than everyone else? Or
that's we were a little ahead of the curve. So flashback to 2013, right? New York, New England, even Virginia and DC. And you sort of look at the West Coast, whether it's California, Washington, Oregon, all these places had pretty vibrant distilling communities, right? Most of those places, sort of the wineries and the breweries and distilleries all sort of tracked together, right? So you had wine first, beer second, and then the wave of distilling came through. Maryland was a really unique place and a unique opportunity for us in that we were the second distillery to open in 40 years. So it was a really good opportunity because, one, Maryland has this incredible history of being sort of the capital of rye whiskey production. And
Yeah, I learned that
aspect.
last Monday, and I
Yeah.
was completely surprised by that. 'Cause
Right. I mean, it's
such a small state.
Yeah.
Like you never equate Maryland with a distilling history.
Right. You'd sort of think of, Kentucky or somewhere
Yeah.
like that. But Maryland has this incredibly vibrant and beer, brewing as well. There's that amazing documentary, Brewmore, Baltimore, talking about how, basically what an economic driver the production of alcohol was for both the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland and beyond. But so there's an incredible history of making rye whiskey in the state. Prohibition, incredible history of rum running. The governor of Maryland at the time refused to enforce any prohibition legislation. So essentially, you had these laws on the books, but the state of Maryland was like, well, we're not going to enforce them. So drink up, kids.
Do what you
which
want.
was awesome. Yeah. So it was this fantastic thing. And now, but then, in the late 70s, it was 1978. Pikesville Rye was the last distillery in Baltimore. They were making rye whiskey, owned by a family up there who is still up there, sold to Heaven Hill in Kentucky, and all the production moved away. And that was the last whiskey distillery to move out. And after that, rye whiskey, bourbon, all that stuff had sort of fallen out of fashion. Vodka, gin were becoming much more popular. Wine obviously had a boom, 80s into the 90s, and then beer began. And so there was just this, sort of 2 or 3 decade gap without any distilling. I mean, it went from being, a capital of this kind of production and industry to absolutely nothing. I mean, Seagram's had a major plant there. Really, I mean, it was a major industry, and then it just vanished overnight, which I think is a similar story, across lots of industries, especially on the Eastern Seaboard. But it made for a cool place for us to sort of come back, plant ourselves, and then, of course, being on the Eastern Shore was unique because there never really was any distilling industry out there. And so we get to both, sort of piggyback on the interesting heritage in Maryland, but then create something new in the place where we are. So that's fun for me.
Were you already in St. Michael's, or is that you just
so
picked that out of that? That's
right,
where you thought a distillery would be good to open.
Exactly. So St. Michael's is also a funny story because I had always envisioned, putting a distillery in sort of a cool barn somewhere in New Hampshire, close to where I grew up, but was in St. Michael's, it was supposed to only be 6 months. Was going to, sail, race the season, and then kind of head back to New York, right? It was sort of a, just fun for the summer, and then was going to leave. But it turns out one of the gentlemen in town who owns a lot of property and who I also, sail with and often against, sort of sat me down one night, after living there for about a month, and, we got hammered. We were drinking rum, no surprise. And he basically said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, want to have my own distillery. And he said, well, I've got the perfect building for that. Let's go see it tomorrow. And we did. And so, again, you kind of, I think for people who are creative and driven and have ideas they want to do, if you always did the things that you said you'd do when you were drunk, it'd be a really, really interesting story. So
I think I'll have to go back and listen, but
right.
Justin Bonner from Jailbreak's story is semi-similar.
There you go.
They were talking about him and Casey, his partner, were talking about starting the brewery, and they decided they were going to.
Right.
And that Monday, he went in and quit. And
that's so funny.
And then told Casey, and Casey was like, no, I was thinking like months.
Right.
He's like,
right.
well, I gave him my 2-week notice. I'm ready to.
And I think, and this is also something that I always tell everybody, and this sort of speaks more to sort of the entrepreneurial thing, but also the importance, when you're doing something like brewing, winemaking, distilling, at a certain point, you got to start, right? You got to dive in. You got to get moving. I meet new distillers or people who are thinking about opening distilleries all the time who they've been working on a business plan for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Like, what the hell have you been doing all the time? And the other thing is you can dream up all the numbers that you want to make, help yourself sleep well at night, right? But
until you start, you have no idea.
Exactly. It's not based in any reality. I mean, it's all hypothetical. Until you start, until you get moving, until you take that first step, you make your first bottle, you do whatever you have to do, you don't know. And also there's no motivator like the fear of failure once, lights are on and you've got to feed the beast and you got to make the stuff and there has to be some cash flow, right? At a certain point, depending on your model. For us, I mean, we, Jamie and I bootstrapped the whole thing. Had no investors. We started with a really, really tiny budget. Started as literally one of the absolute smallest distilleries in the country. And we were also hyper efficient. And it was partially, the financial aspect of it, but it was also kind of our nature. And but there's nothing motivating like knowing that you have to be moving, right? You can't just, sit on your laurels. You can't just sit there and think about it and, dream, about what could be, because what can be won't be if you don't actually get your ass moving, right? So
in 2013, were there, I mean, my experience with craft spirits goes back a whopping 10 months, maybe.
Okay.
So
this is good.
In 2013, were there other craft distilleries from other states that were on the market and popular, or
so
were you bringing a fairly new idea to this area?
If you go back to 2013, there were about 200 to 250 distilleries active in the country, whole country. Today, I believe for active licenses, there are like 1,200. And by the end of next year, I think we're projected to have like 2,000, something like that. And if you actually look at the graphs where you chart the growth of the brewing industry and the growth of the distilling industry, those lines are almost identical, but distillery growth is just slightly faster. It's really interesting, and it's also particularly interesting right now. We're sort of dealing with a whole bunch of things with excise tax reform and some other stuff that really hasn't changed. And we're talking federal legislation that hasn't changed since Prohibition, and it's just now because literally in the past 4 years, there's been kind of this unprecedented explosion in this industry. So it's a cool time. We're really in the infancy, which is such a weird thing to me because after 4 years in it and having worked for another distillery literally 12 years ago, to still be like, all right, this is the very beginning of something awesome. Is such a wild thing because we're so deep into it too at the same time.
Yeah, the taxes and reporting and things, I thought breweries had ridiculous amounts of reports and things they had to do until I started meeting and talking to distillery owners. Yeah. And then they talked about what the reporting and the samples to send. And
it's crazy. I mean, you literally have to track every drop. I mean, it's, every distillation, basically every time you turn on the still, every ingredient you use, every bottle you make, every sample you give out, I mean, every drop literally is tracked, and that's something that is definitely a burden, and especially for people who've never worked in the industry before. You start out of the gate and you look at the federal reporting forms that you have to do every single month, and it boggles your mind. And God, I hate paperwork. I really do. Bless Jamie's heart. I mean, she does all that stuff now. For the first couple of years, I mean, I still did all that, and that was my monthly drudgery. I despise paperwork. I don't really. I mean, that's literally my least favorite thing. But it is an absolute essential. Because you're making. And it's not unreasonable, right? We're making a legal, addictive, intoxicating substance. Yeah. So it's like, all right, it's onerous, but probably a good thing, ultimately.
One thing I had never thought of, and it was when I was taking McClintock's distilling class last week, was why it's illegal to distill spirits at home. And I just thought maybe it had to do with because you're making such stronger alcohol, they don't want you doing that. But then there's the whole, if you drink the heads, you can get sick from that. But then Tyler had brought up the point, if you're home brewing and things go horribly wrong, you're just going to make a bad product. If you're making wine, you're going to make a bad product. If you're distilling and you're creating just a bunch of alcohol vapor and then there's a spark or something, you're blowing up your house.
Exactly.
So I was like,
it's all these different
that makes
things.
a little more sense of why it's not legal now.
Exactly. It's like you have the aspect of the beginning of the run, the concentrated methanol, right? You can poison somebody to death. The legends about moonshiners going blind literally derived from the fact that at certain points, I think some of these guys are out. They're making booze. They're first little bit starts to come off the still, and it smells kind of sweet. It's not it doesn't taste. I mean, it actually tastes. I mean, it's astringent, but it doesn't taste entirely unpleasant, right? So you drink that and do that enough times. One of the primary side effects of methanol poisoning is temporary blindness. So this is not the kind of thing we want to have happen. You also can't light beer on fire. Pretty easy to light your raw spirits on fire. It's all this stuff, and I sort of understand it. But the sad part of that is pre-Prohibition, we had this unbelievable distilling culture in this country. When you think about the fabric of America, right? What makes us who we are? Well, it's immigrants from everywhere. So you had Germans, you had Russians, you had Italians, the Spanish populations, you had brandies, whiskeys, beer schnapps from Germany, you had all these incredible products being made. You had, sort of your classic American varieties of whiskey, all this stuff happening. And then because of Prohibition, it just vanished.
It's died off completely.
Died off, went away. I mean, and so it's an unfortunate story because also that meant all that knowledge really went out the window. Brewing and winemaking obviously continued on. And because it is legal to do at home, you sort of had this continual sort of democratization of knowledge.
Home brewing was illegal for a long time too.
Right.
I can't remember. I used to know like it wasn't. It really hasn't been legal for that long of a time.
I guess that's true. Well, but it was. I think it was also state by state. Maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think it was federally illegal for a while, and then I want to say Eisenhower is the president that legalized it.
Right.
And then up until only a few years ago, there were still a few states that it was illegal to. I think at this point now it's legal to in every state.
Gotcha. Yeah. But it was. I mean, but again, it's one of those things where
the moral of the story is that our alcohol laws in this country we're just crazy sometimes.
And it's also about how does that knowledge get passed down, right?
Yeah.
When basically pre-80s, the only distilleries in this country were massive industrial operations. It's not like somebody's going to go home and replicate that, right? But somebody can go stomp on some grapes in their backyard or, cook up some grain in a kettle, in the barn. And
so how I was it triple? What was the name of the one you worked at?
888 Distilling.
How large was that distillery?
That's tough to say. I mean, small by any scale. So their reach now is much greater. They've gone on to very illustrious things. I mean, they've won. I guess it was last year they won best single malt in the world. Oh, wow. Literally, consistently they win best single malt in America. So they have done some incredible stuff.
Well, I saw your whiskey was listed as the #1 whiskey in Maryland by Esquire magazine.
Yes, which was very cool.
Although they got the date of you opening wrong.
Right, of course. Bless their hearts. Oh, Esquire. But yeah, no, that was great. And that was a really that was a proud moment for us. Obviously we work really hard. I feel when you're in this business, you feel a definite connection and a passion and a drive to make the best thing you can. And so it's nice when you get recognition like that.
Is there a statewide competition like the Comptroller's Cup for beer and
no.
I think also for one? So they haven't started that.
We haven't started that yet, which is also interesting because 2 years ago, I don't know, there were 4 or 5 of us distillers. Really nothing.
It's rapidly growing.
And now you've got, I think by the end of or beginning of next year, you'll have close to 20 operational distilleries in Maryland.
And I would say 99.9% of you are making a really good product.
Which is great, and that's what counts. You hope that everybody will make good stuff. I think it's fortunate that we've sort of gotten past the moonshiners phase on TV where it was, I'm gonna go and make the best, most authentic moonshine.
The first season of that show was amazing.
Right.
And then it turned into every other reality type TV show.
Exactly. And I think, because the sheriff's departments got
Yeah.
tired of the production crews making them look stupid, so any shred of authenticity just went out the window. But it also turns out, it's, I think a lot of people just don't really like, just raw white corn liquor all that much. So it's like, whoa, this isn't going to last forever, guys.
So
This
I
isn't
was
gonna
at
last forever.
one of my cousin's weddings,
Mm-hmm.
and she was marrying a guy who grew up in West Virginia,
Right.
whose family brought authentic West Virginia moonshine to it. It was the
man.
most pain. I didn't even drink the moonshine.
It's bad, man.
I attempted to eat a cherry that
Yeah.
had been soaking in it, and it may have just been gasoline.
Right, exactly. And you have no idea. I mean, some of those guys, clearly, they know what they're doing. They're making good, being a relative term, good stuff.
I don't think this person did.
Right, exactly. And then you have the people who they've got this recipe, and it may be the most god-awful nonsense in the world, but that's the way they make it.
Yeah.
And there's almost
Because
a
it's
little
on-
bit of pride in how
Yeah.
painful it is to stomach this stuff. So
Because it's in a mason jar with some masking tape on
Yeah.
it that says Applejack or whatever.
just because we've always done it this way doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean we should.
So what did you bring with you today?
So today I brought our two classics, the white rum, which is what everything starts as, and then the dark rum, which is sort of my original kind of recipe, I guess you could say, after this. And so all of it, I think the cool thing about our rums is that they all start really as this. The base for this is half turbinado sugar, half blackstrap molasses. We get it all from this old family sugar mill down in about an hour west of New Orleans. Lula Westfield is the company. We actually just took a company field trip down there a month ago to actually get into the fields and in the sugar mill for the sugarcane harvest and see how everything was made, which was wild. And so this is what everything starts as. It's really I'm really proud of this because one, the way I make this, we use pot stills. I don't know if you're too familiar with that, but it's sort of a very classic method of distillation.
It's the,
So the way
with the
Scotch
up
is
and go.
made. Yeah, it's a lower
It's not
proof.
the big columns and the,
Exactly. So it's a lower proof distillation. It's a lot less efficient. But I would argue that you get the best flavor profile from it. And of course, that's up for debate. And I know, there are a lot of guys out there who will dispute that. But be that as it may, that's how we do it. It gives us a really interesting profile. The characteristic that you get from just our base white rum is no matter what product it is, whereas we've got 15 of them now. But whether it's our orange curacao or the coffee rum or our aged rums, the characteristics that you get in this are sort of the common thread that ties all of it together. And this is, it's something I'm really proud of. I mean, I think, it's not easy to make a really good white rum that kind of has some heart and some soul. A lot of white rums are just kind of, you think of, Bacardi or Captain Morgan, and it's like light, it's, kind of sweet, but ultimately doesn't really taste like much. Might as well be kind of a molasses-based vodka. This is full of character. It's, got raw grassy cane notes, some molasses sort of characteristic comes through in the finish. It's neat stuff. And then the dark rum, a simple rendition on this. I basically take that raw cane sugar that we've used in the fermentations, cook that into a caramel, and add that back to it. And there are two parts to this one. One, it's obviously caramel is kind of a natural complement to rum, right? I mean, it's all sugarcane based essentially. And because I'm using the raw cane sugar for the fermentations, in the caramel, it's sort of a profile that isn't kind of tacked on. It's something that's already inherently part of the spirit. But the other thing that not too many people know about rum is that you can add up to 2.5% by volume of what the TTB says is harmless coloring or flavoring to your rum. And in rum, that's classified as caramel. So almost every aged rum out there has caramel added to it, whether for color or flavor or both.
Okay.
And so it's a profile we've gotten so used to in our commonly available aged rums that it's tough to discern now. And so in our aged rum, we don't add anything to it. So this provides a nice contrast where you say, all right, I've got the white rum, got the dark rum that's been modified a little bit with that caramel, and people will drink this. Like, how long was this aged? And when I tell them not even a day, they're baffled. But it's because that caramel profile is something we've become so used to. So it's a neat product.
Cool.
Yeah, really versatile. Makes awesome. I guess I can't say the real name for it. Rum and ginger beer. Very popular cocktail. We want to avoid potential legal issues with the Goslings Corporation, but trademarked the dark N apostrophe stormy cocktail. But but I would say rum and ginger beer is a fabulous drink. So, and this makes a particularly good one. So, yeah. But do you want to try some of this?
Absolutely,
what do we want to do?
Yeah.
I mean, we're here to
let's
to
try.
sample, right? Which glass do you want to use? Maybe
You
we'll
pick
use these little,
whichever one you
these
want.
little wine glasses.
We've
here
got
should be pretty good.
a large assortment for
All right.
almost everything the Frederick News Post does.
Okay, so we'll do a little white rum first. So we'll start you with that. You can see what you think. Both of these are 90 proof, so you're going to get pretty similar kick from either one. But so in that one, you're looking for kind of literally a raw, grassy sort of distinct cane note. You'll sip it, and I think one of the things that you notice primarily is that after you sip this, the profile doesn't just vanish from your palate. It still lingers there, and that's from the oils and proteins that are present in the distillate because of our use of pot stills.
It's really smooth.
Yeah, and that's just the result of careful distillation, really.
I love how different types of spirits, kind of like the heat just moves around.
Oh, yeah.
And tingles and like
Absolutely.
This one kind of like coats your tongue a little bit, then goes up on the roof of your mouth,
Yep.
and then there's an ending tingle in your nose.
Exactly. There's a lot going on there, and that was kind of the idea. And this was also, making a good white rum is tough. Because for me, my inclination is to sort of appease kind of the real rummies out there, right? The people who are really passionate about it. But, you also want to make a spirit that, kind of the average person can at least approach. It's not like, we're not trying to do, something crazy
So
like
me.
absinthe or, yeah, exactly. But, you want it to be simultaneously approachable, but have, some depth and character to it.
Well,
It's not supposed to be, and I think one of the conversations I had with one of my best friends early on when I was struggling with how, funky or how clean to make it, he said, well, it's not, sort of sugarcane based vodka. It's supposed to taste like rum. And having white rum taste like real rum is something that, at least in this country, because we've been so used to sort of, the spring breakification of this spirit, we haven't gotten so much of.
So with that one, though, there even seems to, and maybe I'm completely
into this
wrong
dark
because I don't know how to articulate how things taste, but it almost has like what a taste that I would typically equate to being aged. Like
Yes.
like a woody taste to it.
And I would describe that as kind of a maturity of the spirit.
Okay, so I'm not completely
No,
wrong
you're on the mark there.
at that. I'm a
And
professional now.
You are. You have a sophisticated palate. You're well versed in spirits after 10 whole months of delving into this wild world. It's good. It's good stuff. But I think that's one of those characteristics in a spirit that's definitely apparent when you come across your better distillers, better distilleries, and ultimately better products, where even the base raw white spirit has a delicacy, a character, and kind of a a drinkability about it that it doesn't, it's not going to peel the paint off the wall. It's something you can actually sip.
The only difference between those is the caramel added back in?
Correct. Yep.
And at what point of the process is that done?
After distillation.
Okay.
So basically you end up with your raw white spirit
And sweeten it up.
And then that one, this obviously to bring it down to bottle strength, the raw spirit's at about 150 proof off the still. Add a little water to it, bring it down to 90 proof. But then for this one, it's just the caramel added to it, and that's it. It's a really simple process.
It changes the aroma tremendously.
Oh, tremendously, absolutely. It's a total evolution of that product by just adding that tiny little bit of caramel to it.
And way smoother. I mean, that one was smooth, but this is
and
almost
so that's the thing about
almost all the tingling is gone.
Yes,
there's just a little tiny bit across the tongue.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the heat going down your
Precisely.
throat or into your nose.
And part of that is the sugar. So the reason, and vodkas often have little trace amounts of sugar added to them, just to kind of mellow it out, sort of fools your palate a little bit, makes you think that it's a little bit lower octane than it actually is.
I think this is the first type of alcohol. Now, most I've tried are beers, and I'm excluding ones that just have extract added into them.
Right.
But I think this is one of the first times I've ever where someone has described the taste of caramel to me.
Yeah.
Where like I try it and I'm like, well, that tastes like caramel.
And it makes sense. Yeah.
Like most of the time, it's like, well, I guess if you make a stretch, that kind of tastes like caramel.
Yeah.
But like this tastes like you could literally have like a caramel chew in your mouth.
And that's it, And it was funny early on. I told another fellow distiller that I was making it this way, and he said, "Oh, well, where do you get your drums of caramel from?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, the caramel that you buy." I said, we literally I make it. Like this is. I was confused for a second. He's like, the stuff that it comes in the drum, and I was like, no, that's not how we do things. And then something else that we're we take a lot of pride in is that every ingredient, everything that we add to our spirits is something that starts out as sort of like the raw item, whether it's the orange peels that get infused in the curacao to the sugar and the molasses that go into the fermentations, whatever it might be. It's all kind of the raw, pure ingredient, and if not organic, incredibly high quality. And that's something that's important to us.
Let's take a real quick break to thank the Roasthouse Pub for supporting the Uncapped podcast and tell you about the event they're having that I'm absolutely the most excited about. On December 12th, they're having a Old Mother beer dinner, which will be featuring a beer that I collaborated with Old Mother on to make called Bandwagon IPA, which I had a sneak peek of it on Saturday, and thank God it is really good, because I as well as other people were quite nervous for how much we've been promoting
your reputation on this,
that it turned out really well. And Nico of the Roasthouse Pub has an amazing menu lined up for it that includes goat stew and a bunch of words I can't pronounce because he finds the craziest foods to use, but it just tastes amazing. So go to roasthousepub.com and I'm pretty sure there are still tickets available for the beer dinner. Nice. You will not be disappointed. And as always, check out their website or the Digital Pour app to check what they have on tap. And thank you once again to the Roasthouse Pub for your support.
And so they brew their own stuff.
Old Mother does.
Old Mother, okay,
so
cool.
Roasthouse Pub's
Nice.
20 tap pub right outside of downtown. Great place, amazing food.
All right.
So you should, if you're gonna eat dinner before you go home, hit them up.
Excellent. All right.
So is rum the first product you created?
Yes. So rum was first. Maybe 3 months after opening, we started getting into the whiskeys. Corn whiskey was first, and then we did the first rye that was made in Maryland in over, I think it was over 4 decades.
That's awesome.
That was wild, because to me it was kind of one. I love rye whiskey. I don't know how much rye you've had the pleasure of drinking, but I sort of always tell everybody rye is a more interesting bourbon. It's basically the corn and the rye that go into bourbon. Sort of like you reverse the quantities of that in that mash bill.
So I love rye.
Yeah.
Like rye bread, rye everything.
Exactly.
Like rye beers. I love them.
I love rye beer.
And I think the first like aged rye I had was McClintock's, and it's
nice.
It's been in the barrel for a year.
Yep.
And they don't consider it done yet, but it was so good.
Oh yeah.
And right now I have a 2-liter barrel of rye whiskey aging in my basement.
That's great.
So we'll see how that turns out.
Excellent. Yeah, check it frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, I had
In 2 liter, it changes rapidly. So yeah.
I had a 3 liter that I was making bourbon in, and
man.
I
That's awesome.
tried that every once, and you're right. It's amazing.
In a matter of
how
months,
quickly.
it's completely changes all that surface area exposure.
But in the rye whiskey distilling class I took, they did like a vertical flight of
cool.
of their whiskey at aged 9 days,
Interesting.
aged I think 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe just how much of a difference 3 weeks made.
Oh, it's wild. It's
And-
wild.
And I think these were from 30-gallon barrels.
Okay.
Then 5 months, and then to the 1 year
Yep.
to show you the differences. And
Oh yeah.
then he used all these sciencey words and
Right.
explained the molecular
Science
differences
stuff,
that were taking
It's
place.
magic. It's all magic.
But
But it is interesting. You sort of I think one of the most intriguing parts of that whole barrel aging process is just how fast the aromatics come out. After 1 month in the barrel, you open it up and you take a whiff and think, oh my God, we got something going on here. And then of course you taste it, and what you've gotten on the nose is not even remotely present on your palate. Yeah. But it is really cool because you open it up and you just take a little whiff, and that's whiskey.
Yeah, I didn't realize how complicated barrel aging was. Like all the factors that come into play, and just
right. And it's barrel aging is one of those things.
It's not just dumping some stuff in a barrel and walking away for.
But in a way, it is. In a way, it is, and that's to me that's the most interesting, at least in terms of American whiskey, right? So we're always required to use a brand new charred oak barrel every time for every whiskey, which gives you this really uniform. I mean, so you taste bourbon, right? We kind of know what that's like. It's sort of sweet. It's vanilla-y. You've got some sort of spice notes there. And if you age, corn whiskey, malt whiskey, wheat whiskey, classic bourbon mash bill, you really always get that profile out of it. And of course you can change char levels and toast and all these things in the barrel. But that profile is just so prevalent. And you can't, and what I tell people too is when you're thinking about aging and what happens in that barrel, and how much what the distiller did impacts the final product. If you do a mass spec analysis on whiskey that's been aged for 2 years or longer, what you realize in terms of the compounds we can perceive on our palates, really 70 to 80% of the entire profile comes not from your special limestone filtered water, God bless you, Kentucky, Grandpa's old mash bill, your secret yeast strain, whatever. It's just from the oak. 70 to 80% of it, just the oak. All that hard work you did in the distillery, it's like 20% of that. Really, it kind of counts, But other than that, it's like you can almost screw up gratuitously, and have this amazing product that comes out in the end. And that's what I tell everybody too. When you're looking at whiskey brands and how things are made, my friend Colin Spellman, who is one of the founders and master distiller at Kings County Distilling up in Brooklyn, written a couple of phenomenal books. I'll plug him right now. The Urban Guide to Moonshining was his first book, and talked about how his distillery got started, his background in it. But then in that book, he's got this incredible sort of the whiskey tree, right? So the main big brands of whiskey in this country, Buffalo Trace, et cetera, and of those distilleries, where does their
I've
raw
seen that.
juice? Yes.
So it has like the trunk,
the tree,
and then it goes into
shows
the branches to show the exact.
Exactly. And all the, essentially all the, the super premium brand is, old granddad at the beginning, right? And it's just funny because you realize all this stuff really starts as almost the same stuff, and it's just how long or, what barrels they picked or whatever, but really it's all the same juice at the end of the day. And it's just that aging process, and how that differs that really makes it super premium or not so premium. And a lot of times there's, you sort of get a clear idea of that point of diminishing returns in terms of how much to spend on your booze too. So
you had said by the barrels you pick. So is there a wide spectrum of quality of barrels?
Man. Barrels
how do you tell?
that's the cool thing. We tightly control every variable in the distillery. Fermentation, mashing, our temperatures, how we, when we're making our cuts off the still. But with the barrels, Buffalo Trace did a cool experiment, 8 or 10 years ago, where they took staves from, cut from oak trees, half of them cut from the top, half of them cut from the bottom, had them, coopered into barrels, and then aged whiskey in them. And unanimously, everybody preferred the barrels that came from the bottom of the tree. And the reason was, at the bottom of the tree, in those oak staves, higher wood sugar content. So it made the whiskey a little bit sweeter. Unequivocally, the preferred method.
But obviously, people are going to be using the top of the tree when
you can't go to your cooper and say, if I went to my cooper and said, "Hey, I only want staves cut from the bottom of the tree," they'd be like, "Yeah, shove off," right? And so you don't get to do that. So in these barrels, every barrel could be made of like 30 or 20 or 30 different trees, right? So you don't know. So it's that one it's the last variable, but it's also almost the most important one, and it's the one we have the least control over, which is so weird. It's like it's completely counterintuitive, right? And so you can have your cooper toast things differently, char them differently, but every barrel gives you a slightly different profile. So for me, over the last week, I've been tasting a bunch of for our next batch of rye whiskey. I've been going through all these barrels that we have socked away, and literally picking, which ones are ready, and even barrels that were, filled on the same day are in dramatically different places in terms of their aging cycle. Part of it is where in the distillery are they? Temperature plays a huge role in the speed of of the aging process. But it's also what trees was that barrel literally made from? And unfortunately, we can't go through and in any kind of practical way, take a little sample of the wood and have it tested and all that stuff. So, but a big part of the job is sort of discerning one barrel to the next, because they are all a little bit different. And occasionally you find these single barrels that are just magnificent. I have one particular rum barrel that was one of the first barrels we ever bought, and it is just outrageously good. Everything that comes out of that barrel is just magic. And can I explain why? Well, no, not exactly, not with any kind of specificity, but everything that comes out of that barrel is incredible. So,
how many times can you reuse a rum barrel?
Sort of endlessly. With each use, it gets a little more neutral because you're stripping tannins and wood sugars and all that stuff out of it. But the other cool thing about the barreling is that the profile over time starts to evolve. So lignin is the chemical that holds all those wood fibers together, right? The alcohol starts to over time break that down in kind of a gradual way, and that chemical lignin is converted into the chemical vanillin, which literally smells and tastes like vanilla. So the Caribbean rum distillers are notorious for using barrels, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
To get that
literally
all the way down to that vanilla taste.
Exactly, because it's not that the barrel becomes unusable, it's just what you get out of it changes. And so they're blending portions of really old barrels with newer ones and to get the profile that they want. And the other little profile, and this is found in very old, especially cognac and Armagnac barrels. So Armagnac and cognac, partially due to the climate where they're aged, often sit for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And you get a profile called Rancio, which is sort of a kind of, I guess you could say, sort of a spicy, sweet, sherry-like depth to it. Not present very often, but it is a profile that distillers who have access to old stuff will come in contact with, and it's very desirable. But the bottom line is, over time, the wood is degrading. You're getting different profiles out of it, and it's a cool thing. It's really interesting. But American whiskey is one dimensional in a way because we're required to use a new barrel every time.
Yeah.
So,
but it can still be a different type of whiskey if you reuse it, right? Or is it?
Yeah, you're also not limited in terms of how you finish it. So a lot of Woodford Reserve, a bunch of other distilleries are doing sort of double oak. Balvenie, very popular Scotch whiskey brand, has for years now done, with their Caribbean cask, where it's a Scotch finished in rum barrels, even though, most Scotch whiskey is aged in, basically half used rum barrels from the Caribbean, finishing in sherry barrels, port barrels, things like that, where wine barrels, you're getting all these different profiles. And you're not limited in terms of what finishing you do. But rum, like Scotch, is classically aged in used barrels.
Okay.
And so both of those spirits, and that's one of the things I love about rum, and that gives you this incredible diversity and profile, is that you've got all these different barrels that are going into this final product. In our aged rums, we've sort of gone in a different direction, where I really try to we use used bourbon barrels. We've got a few rye barrels in there as well, but so we're using used whiskey barrels for aging our aged rum, and I try to sort of get the desirable stuff out of the barrel that we want, right? So we're taking the edge off the spirit. We're getting a little bit of that vanilla characteristic, some sweetness, but we're not aging it so far that you can't tell that there was whiskey in the barrel previously. You get a little waft of that. And to me, it's intriguing and important to sort of preserve some of that fundamental character there. And that the rum was aged in a whiskey barrel, but it's become its own thing and developed its own character. So that's how we do it.
Do you have some whiskeys that you're keeping in barrels for longer periods of time, or do you have a certain amount of time where you're happy with just
most
one
of
or
my
2 years?
Yeah, I mean, so most of our whiskey is in 1, 3, and 5 gallon barrels, which compared to most of it is very, very small.
Yeah.
So your aging cycle is anywhere from 8 months to maybe 2 years if you're really on the long end of the spectrum. We have filled, some starting to get to be larger size barrels, which will take longer. If you're over 5 or 10 gallons, you're looking at least probably around a couple years before you get something that has the characteristics that you're looking for. But that doesn't mean that all things are created equal. I mean, the small barrels, you have to be much more careful about what proof you put the whiskey into the barrel at. I usually enter our stuff into the barrel at a much lower proof, just so you avoid extracting the really hard edged tannins. It's you can definitely tweak things, and that's also part of the fun and the challenge.
If it's a higher proof, it'll pull more. Out of the.
I mean, it's all
barrel.
basically the astringency of the alcohol.
Okay.
Right. So the higher the proof, the more it's the more stuff it's going to strip out of the barrel, and the more quickly that's going to happen. And not that that's a bad thing. Every distiller has their own theories and their own ways of doing it, but that's kind of the stuff you have to take into account when you're using different barrel sizes.
So it seems that for as spirits go, rum has pretty lax rules for it to be able to be called rum.
Right. And that is what absolutely fascinates me about rum. I've been sort of getting back to a little bit of my personal history. I've been a competitive sailor my whole life, so I've always had buddies who were racing in the Caribbean, and where I really got into the weird rums was these guys are bringing back stuff that we just didn't get imported to the U.S. And you line up 50 different bourbons, and there's differences, right? But the general profile is really similar. After you've had 5 or 6 samples, it all started. If I gave them to you blind and said pick these out, you're like, nah, it kind of all tastes the same. Line up 50 different rums from around the world, and you are just everywhere.
People are just free to experiment or whatever.
It's absolutely incredible. Different barrel types, different. You've got rum agricoles made from fresh pressed cane juice. You've got cane sugar based rums, molasses rums, different types of stills. It's just incredible the diversity that you get in this spirit, and that's one of the things that to me is so special, because it just allows for kind of ultimate creativity. And it just, I think in that sense, it also showcases really good distilling, because sure, you can go and make a rum any which way you want to, but is it going to be good? Is it going to be interesting? What's that profile going to be? And what have you imparted to that? And how did you approach it?
Yeah, I was surprised when I found out that Captain Morgan was a real person. I didn't know that he was someone that actually that he was someone who actually existed.
Oh man, yeah. Captain Morgan.
My grandmother's cousin owned a deep sea salvage company.
Right.
So he would go hunt for sunken ships.
That's awesome.
And at a family reunion, he had pieces of Captain Morgan's flagship.
That's amazing.
Wow. There was a piece of wood that he brought with him with a nail that was still in it, and then his compass.
Unbelievable.
He had.
That's incredible.
I need to have him just like start a podcast and just
let
record
him just roll with his
for
treasure hunting stories.
Yeah, like he was on the History Channel once. They had a little thing about him, and we used to always take his stories with a grain of salt, yeah, sure, okay. And then one of my cousins, after he got out of the military, went to work for him, and the first time he came back, he was like, no, he's telling the truth. He would just have these fantastic stories of being attacked and there was always just some there's countries he's no longer allowed in.
That's great. Plundering the sea.
It's kind of because he said a lot to get the rights to. You'd have to do shady stuff to get the rights to be able to bring up. He's not allowed through the Panama Canal.
That's amazing. Wow.
So he's a very, very interesting. And
does he
guy
drink
to
rum?
Talk to. Yes. He does, but he mainly drinks champagne. Anytime you see him, he always has a bottle of champagne.
That's excellent.
Well, multiple bottles of champagne.
And that's my not so secret. So if I had to pick one thing to drink, I mean, gotta love my rum, but if I could only drink one thing, it would be champagne. But
and
I don't want anything to do with making champagne, so we'll stick.
He
with
looks
this,
the part too. He's just a large, boisterous, 6'7", boisterous guy. So
champagne swilling, sort of plunderer of the sea. That's great.
So I need to sit down and just record him telling stories sometime.
Man, that's good.
So I thought it was really cool. Captain Morgan did exist. I always assumed he was just the camel or something, some made up figurehead of a.
I don't know. We'd be happy about. He would necessarily be happy about the commercial portrayal of his legacy, but but it also kind of speaks to the interesting sort of historical context wrapped up in rum, right? I mean, it was spirit drunk by pirates and Paul Revere and everywhere in between, and it's something that has really almost no geographic boundary. I mean, it's rum capital of the world in the 1800s was New London, Connecticut, but would you ever think that? No, you'd be like, oh, this is a Caribbean thing, right? I mean, why would colonial America be cranking out tons of rum? Well, the history is just incredible, and it spans so many countries and so many demographics, and that's one of the things that I also really love about it.
So how do you make your coffee rum?
So
because that was the one I actually think that may be the only one of your products I've had before today,
right?
And just love it.
The coffee rum. We have a guy who works with us, Brett Steigerwald, who I'm sure is probably tuning in. He just had shoulder surgery, so we're hoping for speedy recovery for him. But he came to work for us about 1.5 years ago. I had always wanted to do a coffee rum. Coffee spirits in general are made pretty poorly when they're done in an authentic way. I mean, it's really easy to go and buy coffee extract, rum, coffee extract, mix it together. And it's that sweet kind of if you have a vanilla, or sorry, not a vanilla, a coffee milkshake or something, that generic coffee flavor.
Well, you get that chemically,
but it's
obviously an
it's
extract.
not necessarily bad, right? But it's that generic coffee flavor. So obviously we weren't going to do that because we don't do that kind of thing. So I had sort of figured out how to create a coffee spirit without all the flaws in it, but really needed somebody to execute on it. And so Brett came to us, and he has a cool story because he was actually making a coffee liqueur with vodka, infusing it on his own, and he'd sort of figured out this great recipe. And so it was the perfect kind of marriage of a product that I'd always wanted to do and his know-how. And so we use a couple of different kinds of coffee from our local roaster, Rise Up Coffee. Love those guys. and we use their Costa Rican and a Nicaraguan roast from them, and they source all their coffee sustainably and responsibly. And we picked out. I wanted to do a single origin coffee. That was something that I thought was really cool. Pick this single plantation. I really loved it. And then we tried it with both kinds. It was just better that way. So, quality won over, kind of the winning marketing story, But so basically we just infuse coffee and one other sort of pseudo secret ingredient into the rum. And, it does have a little sugar added to it to sort of round out that profile. But the challenge with that spirit for us was, we started out with a really clear idea of where we wanted to go with it. And that was the tough part was, a lot of the stuff we make, right? A little trial and error. We try to make, we're always constantly evolving and tweaking and improving our spirits. But at a certain point, it's like, this is cool. Like, we're calling it good. And with the coffee rum, we started out with a really clear idea of okay, we want it to be this. And until we get there, we're not going to be happy. So it really took us damn near, it took actually a little over half a year to get that recipe right, because it's so many different things.
Was it the proportions of mixing things together?
Yeah. It's infusion time. It's what proof is the rum at when you start the infusion, what coffee, all these different aspects to making what is, seems like a simple thing, right? It's like, we're going to infuse coffee and rum, and there it is, magic. But it is definitely not that simple, not even close. It is. I also say that it's the trickiest thing we've done yet. Truly, that was a tough recipe to get right. But I think I think we're there.
I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Now of course we just can't mess it up. So it's
Is that something? Is that a hard product to make? With consistency, or once you got the recipe down pat?
Once you get the recipe set, it's pretty much it's consistent. But it doesn't mean you get to kind of relax. And that's the other thing. Once the recipe's nailed, it's like, oh God, we really can't F it up. It's like we got to keep this going. And ultimately, I think that's the challenge for especially those of us who started as incredibly small distilleries. As you grow, if you're fortunate enough to have popular products where people love it and they want more, and my propensity as a distiller and somebody who's I have kind of the creative bug every now and then, I'm really good at doing stuff on the fly, and not always the best at methodically recording every blessed thing I do. So I'm like, this just feels right. I'm just making it. It's good. Here we go.
Damn, how do I do that again?
Right. And then it's like, we have to, recreate this, to perfection. And that's where Brett comes in. He's really good at, documenting all the stuff that goes in. And he's actually a former engineer, so he's a perfect methodical mind in the distillery to make sure we're on point with process. But whereas I kind of want to throw it together and I'm like, we're just going to make this. Let's go. I like to move fast. I like to not, I'm not one for messing around. And I kind of I'm like, I'm going to put this thing here and with that, and we're going to mix this together and it's going to be perfect. And mostly that works, but you do have to recreate it. And so if you develop these products that people love and become popular, you got to keep them going. You can't perpetually do. You could perpetually do one-offs, but it begins to be a game where you do have to focus on consistency. It's not that it has to be exactly precise every time, because I think in nature and in sort of beer or wine or whatever, in wine we celebrate differences year to year, right? I think the same thing is in a way true with spirits, where there should be variations, right? This is a albeit modified product. It's somewhat natural, so we should have variations. We should have evolutions in the thing. But ultimately, that profile.
If someone falls in love with one of your products, you should be able to deliver to them again
and be in the ballpark. And so that's the challenge,
or at least make it recognizable.
Absolutely. Big distilleries. The biggest job of the master distiller he's not in there, figuring out how to make raw whiskey every day. No, that work is done. The big job is, how does Maker's Mark taste the same year in and year out. It's sort of what, almost that fast food model, which sort of sucks the romance out of this beautiful little thing we're doing, right? But you do at a certain point have to be consistent, and I think what you discover is, especially when you're a naturally creative person, you're good at conceptualizing, but then it's execution, right? And that's something that honestly hasn't been easy for me, because it's not my natural inclination.
Yeah.
It's sort of, okay, we hone in on a process, we do it, and then day in and day out, boom, 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 boom. That's not where my mind finds itself naturally, but that is the real work, and it's important. So
which one of your products is your favorite?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Which child do you like? As somebody who doesn't have children, I don't know. Thank God I don't have to answer that question. But
I'll tell you which one's
right,
my
yeah,
favorite.
Okay, so as a parent, you can say maybe you have a favorite, maybe you don't. Sorry, kids. But this is my story, not your dad's. So, I honestly, I just make stuff that I love, and that's been our success. Actually, honestly, that's been our success. We don't track trends. We don't do gimmicks. And everybody else is like, oh, well, the industry's going this way. We're like,
Ben likes this.
Forget that, and like Jamie wanted to do rock and rum, so we banged out a rock and rum. We're the only rock and rum in the country, actually.
What's that?
Rock and rye was a really popular bottled cocktail, sort of early to mid 1900s. It's rye whiskey that literally had rock candy, a few cherries, and a couple pieces of orange shoved into the bottle. And it all kind of melded together, and it was this lovely, essentially kind of a Manhattan in a bottle, really. It was sort of kind of the best way to think of it. But in the TTB standards of identity, there's, in addition to rock and rye, there's rock and brandy and rock and rum. But can't find any record of anybody ever making a rock and rum. So we're the first, but that was something she wanted to do, so we did it. Orange Curacao, most people are like, all right, well, I've seen that really nasty, cheap, syrupy stuff on the shelf. Like, is there a market for really good orange Curacao? Well, yeah, it turns out there is. But it's not something where you do the market research and be like, yeah, let's do an orange Curacao. This is where the financial sense is, But that's where the cool stuff comes from.
Yeah.
Is doing things that you believe in as a company, as a brand, as a distiller. What moves you? And I think that is the strength of our company, and ultimately where all the products that Lion Distilling Company puts on the shelf come from, is that we love it, we believe in it. It's all stuff that I think is awesome. I drink it, I don't know. I mean, I drink a lot of our overproof that I finish with toasted French oak. The Sailor's Reserve rum is the one that you'll see me. I race in a historic sailing season out on the Eastern Shore. It's the Chesapeake Bay log canoes. These boats have been racing for over 100 years, and me and my crew will be on there drinking the Sailor's Reserve. It's our rum that we age and use bourbon barrels. Afterwards at the yacht club, drinking rum and ginger beer with our dark rum, and yeah. So I mean, it's all stuff I love. Obviously, the rye whiskey is something that was a project for me that, to be the first one in over 40 years, a really interesting, historically kind of authentic mash bill, is something that, for me is just awesome. I love it. I love that whiskey.
What's your favorite Maryland beer?
Ooh, God, this is a tough one. I love so many of them. The first one that always is right there in my mind. I just think Burley Oak is awesome. I love that those guys are, and they were kind of heavy into nitro before a lot of people were. And I love that you go to the tasting room and you can have it with, regular, just regular CO2, but then you can have the same beer on nitro, and it's just a cool. I also like contrast in things, and I just love that you can have that same beer recipe, but with two types of carbonation, and it's dramatically different. The guys at Union Brewing are really good buddies of mine. I love them. Love everything that they're doing up there in Baltimore. God, there's so many. I mean, and that's the cool thing about Maryland too. We've got this amazing, amazing brewing scene with some really world-class stuff.
The only thing I dislike about Burley is how far away they are.
That's the thing. But I also like that because people bitch about this with my whiskey all the time. Well, why can't I go to the store and get it? Well, drive your ass out to the distillery and come get it. Way back when, working for Cisco, it's with their beer. Literally, their motto is nice stuff if you can get it. And we kind of have been sort of true to that too. And I like the hard stuff to get. The stuff that's tricky. I think it's cool. If it's and not that it's not cool to be everywhere, but I think it's when you got to hunt for something, it's kind of fun. So,
do you pay attention to your online reviews at all?
We do.
What's the most ridiculous you've ever received?
Man, well, Jamie loves this story. But so, and this actually goes way back. We actually been fortunate. If you look at our reviews, I think they're basically all positive.
I know. I made the mistake of looking at McClin. I didn't look at yours either. I asked McClintock last week what their most ridiculous was. I was like, I don't know, they're all good. I brought them up. Nothing but 5-star reviews.
Well, so we do have one on Yelp.
I'm glad you have one.
Man, you go roll into Lion Distilling Company on Yelp, and you go way back. There's a review that begins. Well, so we visited the distillery on a Saturday, and there was this guy there. We think he may have been one of the owners. And, we were, tasting rums, and we didn't give him any reason to, but we felt like he was judging us. We felt like he was judging us. But the rum was really good, so we bought some anyway. And I was like, So basically, I think a long story short is, I don't know, they probably mentioned, Captain Morgan or something, and I probably frowned. And there was me being the rum Nazi, and made them sad. And oh well. So I have tried to be not critical of people's drinking habits anymore. But
I felt like
you get somebody talking about how much they love Bud Light, and it's like, I'm a little judgy. I don't know. But ultimately, though, we all got to drink what we like. So, hey, God bless you. And but I was pleased that they enjoyed the rum enough to buy some.
Yeah.
Even though I was apparently unpleasant. So, if you folks are out there somewhere, I'm sorry that I judged you and made you feel bad about the things you had drunk in college and before. But yeah. Oh, well.
So do you, before we wrap up, do you have anything coming up you want to let people know of?
Gosh.
Make people aware of?
Next batch of rye whiskey is coming out in about maybe Saturday. Saturday may be the big release date. Could be a couple days earlier. Stay tuned on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We will update the release, and also our next batch of single malt. So simultaneously, I've also been doing a single malt whiskey that's really interesting. I've used a lot of Morris Otter, some Crystal 120, biscuit malt, and a 6-row. So sort of kind of a whiskey that you would almost think of more as a beer, and sort of developing complexity in that way. So that's the way I've been doing the single malt, for a couple of years now, and it's really cool stuff. So second batch ever of our aged single malt coming out in the next few days. Be good stuff. And then we got a couple really exciting things coming up in the new year that I can't talk about yet. But
you can if you want to.
I can't.
Go ahead.
I can't.
It's a safe space.
We're all friends here. In a nice little warm circle of not so much anonymity, but
no one's judging.
Yeah, exactly.
Graham's staring at you.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
think he's I don't.
But yeah, so yeah, and the good news is we do have some 2018 is going to be a big year for us. So I'm really excited.
Now you were at the first Frederick Craft Spirits Festival. Will you
that
be
was
at
awesome.
Again next year?
We will absolutely do it.
Awesome.
It was an awesome event. Love Frederick for doing it. The number
it
of
was
distilleries.
It was an amazing time for
and it was a
torrential
crappy rainy day.
Yes.
Yeah, people still came out. It was awesome. And that was the day we released our 151, which also has become surprisingly popular. So that's cool. So yeah, so that's that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming out to Frederick to hang out.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Cheers.
All right.